Abraham obeyed God and departed and left his home on a journey to the place that God would show him. Eventually, that ended up being what is now the Promised Land, what is now Israel. And Abraham became the father of many nations. He became the father of a great multitude, which would become the Israelites. Several other examples show us in the Bible that, of how courageous men exhibited great faith. We see in the story of Jacob that he hung tough in the tough times. When he was wrestling with a man near Bethel, he wrestled with him all night long. And he hung tough in the tough times. Little did he know who he was really wrestling with was God himself. And it was there that God changed his name from Jacob to Israel. He hung tough in the tough times. He exhibited courageous faith. Joseph exhibited courageous faith by starting over when it all fell apart. You see, Joseph was a dreamer. Joseph had dreams of his brothers falling down and paying homage to him. But his brothers hated Joseph because Joseph was Jacob's beloved son, and Joseph had received the coat of many colors. So his brothers conspired against Joseph and wanted to murder Joseph. But one of the brothers said, "No, we'll just throw him in this pit here." And so they threw him in the pit. And then later on, a caravan that were traveling the opposite way. And the brothers said, "Well, let's just sell him into slavery." So they sold him into slavery. And Joseph finds himself in Egypt under a man by the name of Potiphar. And Potiphar found favor with Joseph because he saw that Joseph was a godly man. And Joseph would do what he was told. Well, when you do what God wants you to do and you do what God tells you to do, there will be resistance. And the devil provided resistance through Potiphar's wife. And Potiphar's wife came to Joseph and said, "Joseph, nobody is around. Nobody's here. Potiphar's out and about, taking care of business. Why don't you just come to bed with me? Nobody will know." And then Joseph, a man of courageous faith, says, "Well, God sees. And if I do this, it will be a sin." So Joseph remained pure, and day after day, Potiphar's wife, I can imagine she was probably a beautiful woman. Day after day, she seduced Joseph, and Joseph would not back down and would not compromise with the world. And he exhibited courageous faith by turning this woman down. Then he was thrown then when Potiphar came back, and Joseph had ran away after the woman had propositioned him, the woman lied about Joseph and said, that Joseph was not to be trusted, and Joseph was, he wasn't capable of doing the affairs of Potiphar. So Potiphar had him thrown in prison. From riches to rags to riches. That's the story of Joseph. He had it made when he lived with Jacob. Then he finds himself in a prison. But God still had a plan for Joseph's life, you see. You see, God used Joseph's ability. God gave him this ability to interpret dreams. And Pharaoh had a dream. Of course, Joseph had already interpreted the butler's and the baker's dream. One of them died and one of them lived. But for 3 years after that, the one who lived forgot about Joseph. Until the Pharaoh had a dream one day, and the fellow said, well, I remember this Joseph in jail. Go get Joseph. So Joseph comes before Potiphar, and I'm sure he's probably terrified. I'm sure he probably thinks, that it's probably for a quick death. But Pharaoh says, I hear that you interpret dreams. You see, I've gotten all my magicians and I've gotten all my astrologers, and they couldn't interpret my dream.